This might sound crazy, but Empress Elisabeth of Austria was never supposed to be Empress of Austria.
Whoa. I don't know anything about like Austrian history at all.
Yeah, it's gonna be a new one, guys.
Yeah.
I got the European and the American. Austria. Well,
Yeah.
Austria is European.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is true.
that is true.
So
Nice.
all I know is it was in World War II.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kaelyn.
And I'm Sami.
And I'm Jacob, back again.
Yes, Jacob's back for another episode about some more European history.
Yeah, so...
Hold it like a little closer to your mouth.
So
Yes.
yeah, so this time, I was researching things to do, and I was switching between a lot of people. Like I was gonna maybe do like Margaret Thatcher, like Jackie Kennedy.
Oh, yeah.
But then I wanted to do like a female in history who isn't well known to Americans, because I wanted to ask for you guys at least, okay,
You got it.
You got it.
cut this part out.
Okay.
But
No.
when someone mentions the periods from like 1850 to 1865, what's the main thing in your mind?
Okay, hold on.
1815 to 1865.
Like slavery.
And
Yeah,
what was the
Civil War?
conflict?
Civil War, yeah.
Oh my God, I was right.
And like, when for American students who are taught about history during this time, I feel like we're chiefly taught about the American Civil War, and that's still like a very prominent part of our history, but I'm kind of I find it a little bit ridiculous that we're not taught about things that were happening, across the pond in Europe during this time.
The
Yeah.
pond.
And I think because also like at least like in high school, you have like world history for freshman year, but like that's covering the entire world, so you can't get into like
Oh, yeah.
the like different things versus like you have an entire class for American history where it's like it's still a lot of history to cover, but like you can get into more like deeper things because you have
Right.
And
less
these are
to cover.
mandatory.
Yeah.
Whereas we have European like history, but it's not mandatory.
But also even in European history, it's still like the entire continent.
yeah,
of
we
Europe.
don't get to learn like one
Right, and
thing.
even predominantly in world history,
It's just America.
So sorry.
It's just America. I have to get used to this.
You can pull it.
Yeah, you can pull it.
I have
You
to.
can pull,
Yeah.
like you can go
Cool.
all the way up to
Yeah.
your body.
Oh, cool. I just didn't know.
No, you're
Okay.
good.
No, you're fine.
So yeah, even in even in world history, the predominant thing is the American Civil War. And again, I don't want to hate on our country's history because it's still very interesting and predominant. But during the American Civil War, there were full-on empires. Like France was an empire. There were tons of things happening, and we just don't know about it. And one of the predominant people that we also don't know about is Empress Elisabeth of Austria. So let's dive in.
Right.
So Elizabeth was, of course, born as with the name Elizabeth, but she was referred to as the nickname Sissy. So I'll be, or Sisi, depending on the German kind of connotations with that. But I'll be referring to her as Sisi, just so it's easier, and because there's a lot of Elizabeths and things during this time period.
Yeah,
But
there are.
she was born on December 24th, 1837 in Munich in the Kingdom of Bavaria. So last episode I talked about Marie Antoinette and how she was the daughter of the Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. And Bavaria was one of the states within the Holy Roman Empire. But now in the 19th century, the Holy Roman Empire has dissolved and it's now the Austrian Empire, and Bavaria is its own kingdom. So she was the third child and the second daughter to Duke Maximilian Joseph of Bavaria and Princess Ludovica of Bavaria.
What a name.
Princess Ludovica was the cousin of Maximilian Joseph.
Okay.
Still a lot of inbreeding during this time.
Oh, fun.
Right. And I want to just take a brief moment to announce the close family connections, because that will be really pivotal to Empress Sisi's marriage negotiations later on. So her mother, Princess Ludovica, was the half-sister of the Bavarian King Ludwig I, and the daughter of the former King Maximilian of Bavaria and Princess Caroline of Baden. Baden is another state within Germany. And Elizabeth herself was from the ruling house of Wittelsbach, which is a ruling Bavarian dynasty, and it's not as known as the Habsburg dynasty, but they were still rulers of Germany and very prominent rulers of many states within Germany. Sissy's godmothers, upon her baptism, so when you were baptized during this time, you would have godmothers or godparents, and her godmothers was the Princess Elisabeth of Prussia and Princess Amalie of Saxony, so both very prominent women in their own right. And because of all of these connections, Sisi is immediately recognized as a Duchess of Bavaria in her own right. So the British nobility is very simple. We know like the rules of the nobility, but in Germany, you know, somebody could be a princess of a certain state and their daughter could be also a princess of a certain state. So it's very different to how, you know, we would think of like the British nobility in Downton Abbey. So it might be a little bit confusing, like, why is she a Duchess of Bavaria if her father is a Duke of Bavaria, and like that sort of thing. But just trust the process.
Okay.
And just note that in her early life, she is known as the Duchess of Bavaria. And I will be linking a family tree in the Spotify description for people.
I will be linking one.
Will be. I don't do the work past the recording phase.
Yes.
And
Got
so
it. Note to self.
Sisi grew up very closely with her sister, the Duchess Helene. They were very close in age. Helene was only about 3.5 years older than her, although Sisi did grow up with 9 siblings in total.
Jeez Louise.
The portrait that you see on the slide is actually a younger version of her with her brother, Maximilian. And this was probably taken in the countryside of Possenhofen, which was their country residence. So Helene and Sisi were tutored under an English governess very early in their life, but then Sisi was educated separately under a German governess because it was presumed that she was of a more timid nature. She showed little interest in learning material, like our girl Marie Antoinette.
Eats.
Twin.
A podcast or an episode earlier, but she did enjoy drawing and writing, and she did enjoy horseback riding. She often skipped her lessons to do horseback riding, and then similar to aristocrats of the time period, depending on the social seasons, she wouldn't just be confined to one residence. They had multiple residences. Her chief residence was the Prince Max Palace in Munich, and the Possenhofen Castle in the southwest of Munich in the countryside. So now that we sort of have that early life, we have to talk about what's happening in Austria. And I know I talked a little bit about this in the episode, a little bit earlier in the episode, but Emperor Franz Joseph, the guy we see on the right, is currently reigning over this very vast, multicultural, but also unstable Austrian Empire. This is a map of the Austrian Empire. We see that similar to the Holy Roman Empire, it still contains a lot of German states, Bohemian states, Croatian, Serbian, that sort of thing. But it's very revolutionary now. During the periods of 1848, this is like chief, revolution in Europe. Like France has a revolution, Vienna has a revolution, Prague has a revolution. So many of these states have a revolution for independence. Italy is having a revolution. And he and Franz Joseph had become the emperor upon the abdication of his uncle, Ferdinand I, and his father, Franz Karl of Austria, during these revolutionary uprisings. The imperial family actually had to flee to another city because in Vienna it was so unstable at the time. So Franz Joseph succeeds the throne at 18 on December 2nd, 1848. And his mother, the Archduchess Sophie, who's the woman to the left, she was known as the only man in the Hofburg because she was very influential in kind of determining what some of the policies were.
Queen.
And yeah, so she's kind of a queen. Like, she's mother. Like,
she has that kind of sexy shoulder.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, she's kind of like,
and she knows it.
All right,
yeah.
go off, queen.
And so when Franz Joseph was 23. Not he, but she was on the hunt for a husband for him. Because if anybody was going to choose a husband, it was going to be her.
A husband for him?
A wife. It was going to be her.
Yeah.
Oh, a wife for him. Okay. I was like, oh, we're changing history.
Not this sort of fan fiction.
I was like, I got a little disappointed. I was like, oh, okay.
And compared to a few centuries ago, the Austrian court is now very, very strict. It follows the Spanish example from the 18th century, which is even more strict than the French court of the 18th century, in which it's like very toxic social climbing, and you know the only way to get to the top is if you have those family connections.
Sorry.
We have trauma from it cutting out.
I have a lot of trauma, guys, from our past episodes. As our diehard fans would know, sometimes our equipment stops filming.
Yes.
So if I get up a few times and
Sometimes the content is that good.
Yes.
It just stops filming.
That's why you didn't get an episode last week.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a traumatic experience with that. So if I get up a lot, I'm sorry.
Just
I'm
ignore.
Yeah, just ignore me walking.
Listen to me.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's a little bit of a background of the Austrian Empire.
Okay.
So again, it's no longer the Holy Roman Empire. That's gone. She's gone. She
was
ran so the Austrian Empire could walk.
Right.
Walk.
Or is it walk so it could run?
Yes, walk.
I was like, wow, this is an old man.
So now the marriage proposals are beginning, but Archduchess Sophie didn't want any stranger. She wanted a niece as a daughter-in-law, someone that she could mold easily and who would have those blue-blooded family connections.
Don't we all? That's so real. Whenever I think about what I want, my daughter to marry, I'm thinking,
my cousin.
My cousin. My sister's
love.
Son right there. That's who I'm going to get married with. Right? Like, that's wild.
And so, therefore, Archduchess Sophie turned to her sister, Princess Ludovica. And Princess Ludovica turned to the Duchess Helene to begin process for marriage negotiations. Helene is very pious. She sort of knows the right things to say, and she's very calm and spirited, or very calm compared to Sisi, who's very spirited, and she's like, she's very relaxed. And so, to begin the process of marriage negotiations, Princess Ludovica and her two daughters, so Helene and Sisi, are invited to Bad Ischl, where there's the imperial villa in Austria, to receive the formal proposal of marriage. So this will be like a dinner with with dancing and fireworks or something. Aww. That's the formal proposal of marriage. It's where it's indicated to the senior members of the court that Helene would be, in fact, the Empress of Austria from that point forward. And I've been to Bad Ischl before. It's a very cute town. I've been to the Imperial Villa, and it's this sort of romantic place.
You hear him bragging about all his travels?
Sometimes you gotta go do things.
I went to London and I
saw
the crown jewels.
Well, I didn't have to.
Florida.
Listen, travel with, my advice real quickly as a pause, travel with your parents, because it's basically a free vacation.
Truly.
So I'm just going to say that.
True.
I didn't have to pay for anything.
Right.
That makes me sound more spoiled.
In your quiet neighborhood.
In my quiet neighborhood, where I'm going to go for a walk later. So, therefore, out of the Bavarian entourage, as we'll call it, it's Princess Ludovica, Helene, and Sisi. They're going to Bad Ischl. And out of the imperial entourage, it's going to be Archduchess Sophie, her husband, Archduke Franz Karl, Franz Joseph, his brother Maximilian, who would actually become later the Emperor of Mexico, and...
Why are they all connected?
Karl Ludwig, who was actually who had a very close connection with Sisi and was supposed to possibly enter into an engagement with her. But of course, things will end up differently. Okay. And so by late August 1853, the Wittelsbach or Bavarian entourage has arrived in Bad Ischl, but they're clad in black mourning clothes. This was because they were mourning over a distant relative, or a relative called George, who was the brother of the Queen Dowager of Bavaria.
What a name.
Related to Princess Ludovica.
We got Ludovica, Maximilian, and then George.
You got a wide range of names, guys. And unfortunately, there was a communication error, so on their way from Leopoldskron Palace to Bad Ischl, the trunks didn't arrive. So they're basically being presented before the Empress, or before the Archduchess Sophie, in black mourning clothes rather than the elegant colors that were fashionable at the time.
Right.
But while the black did, clash with Helene, Sisi actually looked more striking in it. It really did bring out some of her features, and this would play an advantageous role for her as the Bad Ischl visit progressed.
Okay.
So she's not supposed to be getting engaged or married right now.
No, she is kind of there because they felt bad because of actually she was courting a suitor, but he died, so she was depressed. And Princess Ludovica's like, well, like, stop moping around the house. Let's go, girl.
Yeah,
let's
like,
go
let's
on a
get you out of the
girls'
house.
weekend.
She ate that up.
Good
mother.
So, yeah, and the new Netflix series, The Empress, that depicts this, kind of portrays Princess Ludovica in an unfavorable light as a very domineering, almost very cruel person. But I would like to think that Princess Ludovica actually did love her daughters equally and very passionately, and she just wanted Sisi to feel
right.
I mean, she brought Sisi along, even though she was supposed to. She said, come on.
So that moment, like, if you can picture it in your head, that moment where, like, you know, Emperor Franz Joseph enters the room and Sisi's, like, in black and, like, the light's shining and the birds are singing. That moment didn't last long.
What color is her hair?
It was like a brown, kind of brown brunette
Very
color.
Lana Del Rey look.
I love that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and so Princess Ludovica had #goals, and her main priority was to establish a relationship between the more pious Helene and Franz Joseph. But they were actually very ill at ease with each other, and the brief time that they spent in each other's company was very uncomfortable and awkward. So, and this kind of was already from the get-go kind of falling apart because Franz Joseph immediately became infatuated with Elizabeth instead.
Sisi, go.
I would like to mention that at this time, Sisi's only 15 years old.
But
it's not that bad of an age gap. It's about a 7 years age gap between the two. So,
so he's what, 21?
He's about 21.
Okay.
So they're both still young, but Sisi's 15 years old, and she would be.
Oh, her suitor already died too.
Yep, and so she was proposed. So she would later be proposed to by Franz Joseph, who defied his own mother and stated that he wouldn't marry anyone if he couldn't marry Sisi. And the Archduchess Sophie was like, okay, come on, like, trying to reason with him.
Right.
Like, you really want this wild, you know, girl being the empress of such vast territory. And he was like, well, either her or no one.
I am so
kind of goals.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is actually, I'm going to start crying.
It's a love
Why
story.
is there no man like this?
I was getting ready to say this is giving book talk. Like,
literally.
It was a love at first sight situation.
Where are the men like this now?
But also he did, you know, kind of dog out. What's her name? Helene.
Helene clashed with Black.
Let's not feel too bad about Helene. She would later marry the Prince of Thurning's Taxis, and he was, you know, a very high superior nobleman in the realm. So
she's fine.
She didn't luck out on it. She lucked out.
Yeah, she just needs to stop wearing black.
And not a color.
So here are a couple of actual pictures. So this is a photograph of Empress Sisi.
That's crazy that we had photos.
And this is her sister Helene, which I honestly don't think that Helene clashes too much in black, but that's what the biographers say. And then this is the Imperial Villa in Bad Ischl. So,
dare I say she looks better?
No, dare I say.
And if you look at a lot of photos, Helene actually is very striking. She's very gorgeous.
Dare I say that Helene kind of actually... I thought, whenever you said that, I thought this was the one that clashed.
Yeah.
That was the one that ate it up.
Well, and, you know, photographs from the time period just don't do justice because, again, this is from, like, the 1860s. So we were just, you know, we didn't have the portrait mode on the iPhone yet.
Helene just looks more elegant.
Ate it up.
And she was more elegant and pious. Sisi loved to, like, get out in nature and go hiking and riding, and she did
So she's literally me.
I was gonna say Sisi looks pretty, but she doesn't look like.
She looks young.
She looks cute.
She definitely looks
cute.
Yeah.
Well, she is 15.
Yeah, that's true.
And
how old was Helen? So she was 3 years older.
Was about 3 years older.
So she was around 18.
Yeah.
Which makes sense for how she looks right there. She is eating it up.
Yeah.
I have to say.
Helene does eat it up. She
Helene,
eats it up for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Helene, you're eating, honey.
And so Princess Ludovica was nonetheless satisfied that one of her daughters would be, you know, the empress of such a vast empire and marry into the Habsburg family. But she was still very skeptical and worried for her daughter's inexperience. So Ludovica was actually worried, and she was like, okay, but I don't really know if Sisi's gonna do well in this role.
Right.
I hate when people portray like a mother of in kingdom, like in the history, as like a bad person.
Right, and Ludovica wasn't a bad person. She was a mother, and that came with its own challenges during this time.
Especially at with a princess and the kind of children she has.
And she comes across very
Mama Bearish.
Christian or before she was Christian, or very domineering, just very like takes no one's mess, you know.
She does, and that's like,
probably why she's portrayed that way.
That's the Habsburg woman during the time period. Like, they take no shit.
Yeah,
they are very.
Bleep that out.
They're they need to get things done, and you know, Archduchess Sophie, who's Franz Joseph's mother, she has no time for his, you know, inexperience. You know, it's a big empire, it's a vast empire, and she needs to get stuff done. So anyways, yay, we end with this visit with a marriage proposal.
Love.
So with a dowry set for about $240,000, along with some clothes and jewels, Sisi leaves Munich on April 20th, and in 1854 she travels to Straubing, where her and Princess Ludovica and Helene, as well as an entourage, takes a paddle steamer to Vienna along the Danube River, and where they will eventually arrive in the sort of outskirts of Vienna. So you can imagine sort of this grand procession on the Danube River, of like a steamboat with like the imperial flags and everything, and along the way people are waving the flags and waving. And if there's a 1955 movie about Sisi, and it does a marvelous job kind of portraying that. And then on April 24th, about 3 days later, Sisi is married at the Augustinian Church in Vienna. That's where Marie Antoinette was married by proxy all those
years ago. Oh my gosh!
With the attendance of at least 70 bishops, and the ceremony, you don't need to know him. He's the Archbishop of Rochester, but you don't need to know him. He's irrelevant.
Okay,
he's just a background character.
Yeah.
And so the honeymoon period is actually to commence at Laxenburg Palace. That was the former childhood retreat of Marie Antoinette. I know I keep referencing to Marie Antoinette, but for listeners who are kind of like, who is this woman? Because again, not a whole lot of people know about Empress Sisi. I'm just trying to connect it back to the fact that this is like an imperial dynasty that is so closely connected.
Yeah.
And throughout much of this time, though, Franz Joseph is still inexperienced. Franz Joseph was by no means non-caring, but he had a lot of work to do. He was, you know, the Emperor of Austria, so he has to do, you know, he was at his desk at 6 a.m. to like the evening. And so, but even with this, Sisi was by herself really most of the time, and she only had her flowers in the surrounding park and gardens as her friends. She had an entourage, but ladies in waiting like can either be your friends or they can be your business like acquaintances.
Right.
We don't know how it was like. It could have been, she was probably just getting used to having an entourage of ladies in waiting that would follow her around and everything. And this is sort of a more accurate illustration of the time period of sort of like their wedding announcement.
Cute.
She looks like the Queen of Hearts.
She's kind of eating it up in that dress.
Yeah, she is.
She is.
So now she needs to adjust to being an empress and to motherhood. So Sisi grew up in a carefree environment, very carefree. She was introverted by nature, and among the stifling formality of the Habsburg court, dictated by these rigid protocols and strict etiquette, even like every expression, you had to have like a specific expression and way of talking. This left her in a fit of illness and anxiousness, because again, you're now moving from being able to do whatever you wanted in the countryside to moving to the stifling atmosphere in which even if you wanted to see your husband, you have to make an appointment through his personal secretary. Right, like she couldn't just go into her husband's apartments and be like, hey, how's your day? She had to book an official appointment through her husband's secretary.
Crazy.
And, you know, her goal after all was to produce a child and a symbol of an expansive family replicating an expansive empire. But fortunately, and to a surprise, she learned that she was pregnant on March 5th, 1855. She didn't have the same issues with Marie Antoinette. You know, Franz Joseph is normal in this instance.
Love him.
And within the tranquil confines of Laxenburg Palace, she gives birth to, unfortunately, not a boy, but a girl, Sophie.
Okay.
Just 10 months after her wedding. And we don't know if this could have been during the honeymoon period, because honeymoons back then could last up to 10 months almost. And they could have stayed at one residence before moving to another. And Archduchess Sophie had decided that the child should be named after her. She was like, I don't really know if... She was like, I don't want your guys' choice of names. I want the child to be named after me.
Icon, honestly.
And she took complete control of the baby. She refused Sisi to breastfeed the child, which was still taboo at the time. or even care for her own child. She had the nursery that was close to Sisi's own apartments moved to the other wing of the castle where she could take care of the child. And the same year happened in 1856, where a year later Sisi gave birth to another daughter, Gisela. This is Gisela later on in her life. And throughout this time, though, she still didn't produce a male heir, and Sisi became increasingly unwanted in the palace. Like, people were like, okay, there's this wife lingering around.
Yeah.
Even her husband?
No, her husband loved her very much.
Okay, that's good. Oh my God, that made me relax.
He always, I will say it now, he always and forever loved Sisi.
Right.
She often,
why do I want to cry?
She often found these, you'll cry later, trust me. She often found pamphlets accusing her of political meddling. Because, like all women at the time, she's just treated so badly.
Right.
By, not by the public, but by the nobility. Mm-hmm. Because the nobility, they're kind of stingy. Like, they're social climbing, you know, they try and get advantageous things wherever they can.
Yeah, and it's like you want to stay in power.
So you want to stay in power and you want to stay in favor.
Exactly.
And, you know, and nobility sometimes think that they have more power than they actually should have. Mm-hmm. So hence the political pamphlets of her being like, oh, political meddling. But Sisi wasn't interested in politics. Right. She never was.
No, she just wants her nature.
She'll be interested in Hungarian politics much later, though.
Okay.
So now, a brief visit to Hungary. So in 1857, the imperial couple make a trip to Hungary, which at the time was seen as a somewhat hotbed for independence. Archduchess Sophie does not like the Hungarians. She refers to them as backwards, sort of. And this is the very Slavic. This is not the pristine German, imperial German kind of court. But this is the Slavic sort of like Transylvanian, you know, kind of way. So, and they refer to it as backwards. The Hungarians had their own nobility, their own form of parliament, but it was nothing compared to the Austrians, and they were often at odds. But Sisi actually found a welcome respite from the constraints of Austrian court. It was a little bit more relaxed there, and Hungary left a deep impression on her. Again, Archduchess Sophie despised the Hungarians, but Sisi, on the other hand, cherished them. She had to learn all of the languages of the imperial Habsburg Empire, including Croatian and things like that. And she would actually willingly want to learn Hungarian. And the country, in turn for adoring them, really adored her. Mm-hmm. During this time, though, I would like to say that both Sisi's daughters became incredibly ill, possibly from traveling. And while Gisela recovered, unfortunately, 2-year-old Sophie passed away.
Well, honestly, sounds like the Archbishop Sophie's fault. Because
Archduchess, yeah.
Whatever, I don't care about her.
She
I don't like her.
She wasn't on the trip. And
yeah, but you know, I bet whoever's up there, whoever they were, was looking for her and was like, "That's Sophie."
That's Sophie.
Sorry,
but
that's mean. I don't like her.
Historians assume that this was actually due to typhus, and we can say that it's perhaps from the traveling because newborns already have trouble traveling. Mm-hmm. Like, try and be on a plane for 7 hours with a newborn child.
Yeah.
But traveling by carriage, in which you didn't have all of the best comforts, that could have really taken a toll on young children. Sisi was incredibly distraught, and as somebody who was already prone to depression and melancholic bouts, she was pushed into a heavy depression this time, and she was only 19 years old. Like, hello? That's the same age as some of us.
Yeah.
And, the death haunted her for the rest of her life, and even caused her to neglect Gisela a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Gisela was fine, though. I don't think she really cared in the
end. Yeah.
And through a year of recovery and no doubt hardship for Sisi, on August 21st, 1858, we have some good news. She gave birth to the heir Rudolph.
Okay.
What a name.
Yay.
And Rudolph is sort of the imperial name that's been dated back all the way to the medieval ages.
Oops,
so it's
I
really
made fun of it.
Fitting. It's fine. It's not really so popular anymore. The birth meant that Sisi's influence in court increased, and she took a lot of advantage of it. This was particularly true with politics, and so she stood as a mediator between the needs of the Hungarians and the Emperor Franz Joseph, and she often went to Franz Joseph and said, okay, these are what the Hungarians need. This is what they're facing. And he was like, okay, I'll consider it.
She's an icon.
But if she probably didn't push forward her opinions, Hungary would not later become part of the Austrian Empire.
I was going to ask that.
We'll get to that too, because that's pretty important. And at the same time, Sisi's very fairly liberal-minded, but put it in a way that it was the 19th century Christian monarchist liberal-mindedness.
Right.
But in a way, she did increase the conflict of nationalities within the empire because she largely tended to side with the Hungarians. Archduchess Sophie just continues to interfere with everything, and Sisi was again blocked from the upbringing of her son, but she openly rebelled.
I love Sisi. I really don't like Sophie.
My head and I was like, I wonder what they're gonna say.
As she should.
I love her.
I hate insufferable people like that. Like Sophie.
I hate mother-in-laws. I hate mother-in-laws.
It's giving something like off of Reddit.
In-law you would never really want.
No, this is giving the Reddit stories. Yeah. Like I should put on screen right now me doing Subway Surfers.
You playing with slime?
Yeah. Guys, I'll go make slime
I'll
tonight.
make that a TikTok.
Honestly.
So, but unfortunately, this is the start of a very long illness. Sisi is experiencing some types of illness. She's been experiencing some types of illness for a while. And due to these nervous attacks and these fits of coughing that she's been experiencing at her time in the Hofburg, by 1860, her health actually becomes very alarming. After meeting with the court physician, she was reported to not only suffer from a blood disorder, which reduces oxygen, but physical exhaustion and even the early stages of tuberculosis.
No.
So, she was just suffering from so much of an illness. And with this in mind, she was actually recommended to spend some time away from Vienna, the Madeira, which is an island in Portugal, to be exact. This purpose wasn't for her health, though. There was ongoing rumors that Franz Josef was having a liaison with an actress, which we don't know.
You told me he loved her.
He did. So that's partially why a lot of people don't believe that this was true. But even with the rumors going around, you want to separate the Empress from the Emperor in sort of, so it's not like too much of a rumor mill. So Elizabeth was like, I'm out, and she used the excuse of her illness to leave her husband and children at the Hofburg and spend the winter in seclusion. She returned to Vienna again, but as soon as she arrived, her illnesses came back. So you can see a pattern.
Yeah.
She's just not comfortable in the Hofburg.
Right.
She's not comfortable there. It's very stuffy there. And I am going to be spoiled once again and say that I have been to the Hofburg.
Oh my God.
It is, in fact, very stuffy. Would never want to spend my life in there. And so she was instead recommended for the island of Corfu, which is one of the Greek islands on the Ionian Sea. Okay. She would later build a palace there, and she absolutely loved it there. Whenever she was, at these places other than Vienna, her health, as soon as she got there, increased, and she was much better. But at Corfu, she was examined again, and it was believed that these illnesses was combined into something, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but I'm probably not going to pronounce it, psychosomatic, or a symptom disorder that is coinciding with anxiousness and manipulated thoughts. So often the body thinks that, something is going on even when it might not be going on. And this was beginning of her slow removal from court life and her duties as empress. She would stay in Corfu for the full year and wouldn't return to Austria until 1862. She didn't remain in Austria for long, though, and again, she would be at the small town of Bad Kissingen, where she would be a regular throughout much of her life. Later, though, people start to notice, okay, where is our empress? Why does she keep leaving? So she was eventually recalled to Vienna, and they told her, hey, you need to assume your roles again as a mother and as an empress, because there are a lot of rumors spreading.
Well, you know who doesn't want her to be mother? Archduchess Sophie. The mother trucker.
Guys, she's not leaving anytime soon, though. So this is where I would like to draw on what's happening politically with Sisi during her time as empress. So there's the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1816-72. In this picture, she's eating. This is her in her Hungarian coronation robes.
Oh, good. So
she is eating, and she's very beautiful. She is. The pictures just, unfortunately, don't do her justice.
I do see a little bit of inbreeding.
You can.
I was going to say,
She married her cousin.
Right.
It's the chin.
You can see the chin, and you can see a little bit of the fact that,
and the nose.
And the droop as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, girl. Love you.
But the Austro-Hungarian Compromise, thanks to Sisi in 1867, created the dual Austro-Hungarian monarchy, and that's how it would be known until 1913, or 1916, end of World War I, in which Hungary would have a prime minister, it would retain its status as an alliance and kingdom within the Austrian Empire, but Sisi and her husband would be known as the King and Queens of Hungary. In June the same year, they're given a ceremonious palace east of Budapest, which is to sort of serve as their headquarters, and she has a fourth child, Sophie, after her younger sister. And she was able to educate her as much as she wanted to. Archduchess Sophie actually magically did not intervene.
Okay.
And so Sisi's mother was actually slowly fading away from the political scene, and she would eventually die in 1872.
Wait. Archduchess Sophie would die?
Would die in 1872.
Thank God.
So but she's slowly fading because she's old. So no way is she, after working so hard, gonna keep working. She wants to take a break. Unfortunately, the fourth child, Sophie, would pass away in infancy.
So it's always Sophie. The Sophie.
It's the name Sophie.
Yeah, it's Sophie. It's bad luck.
I was gonna say there's like some type of curse or
because Sophie's a die, not a third one.
Yeah.
There is her younger sister, Cece's younger sister, Sophie, would actually meet her own tragic end.
That's crazy. We should look at that's another episode.
Looking at the name Sophie through the years.
This is where I would like to bring in the suicide at Mayerling, which if you are our European, you were taught of because this is a major event for the Habsburgs. In 1889, Rudolf, the firstborn son of Cece, was found dead with his 18-year-old mistress, the Baroness Marie Vestera, in what was suspected to be a suicide pact at the Imperial Hunting Lodge in Mayerling.
So now she doesn't even have a son to take over the emperor.
She does not, and this was sort of rocked everyone. Like a suicide pact between an 18-year-old and
his 18-year-old mistress
and the son of the Emperor of Austria is found dead at the country retreat at Mayerling. Like, hello?
Yeah.
What is going on here?
I know that was in the pamphlets.
This is a photo of Cece around the time of the suicide at Mayerling. And Cece never recovered from the tragedy, as one would expect if you found that your son, killed himself. And we don't know why, but it's safe to say that because of the inbreeding, partially, Rudolf developed those sort of depressive and almost manic thoughts of killing himself. Through the periods of 1888 to 1897, she lost almost all of her family. She lost her father, her sister Helene, and her mother.
Helen.
Mother and father due to probably older age, Helene probably due to sickness. And her younger sister, Sophie, would later die at the accidental fire at the Bazaar de la Charité in Paris. And this was a big event in which tons of women were in this charity, and this the venue space caught fire, and tons of influential women died, including the younger sister, Sophie.
It's the name.
Right, and the Mayerling incident actually increased public interest in Cece, like almost to a Princess Diana level. And wherever she went, she was a sensation. And this, though, increased her separation from the court further. She traveled extensively to Corfu, to Great Britain, to Ireland, even to the Ottoman Empire later in her life, as a way to remove herself from her unhappy life. And I would like to unfortunately say, too, that Franz Joseph still loves Cece, but Cece is sort of like, I don't really want to talk to you.
Right.
I don't want to have any more children with you. I just sort of want to be by myself.
Thank you next.
Thank you next. I need my girl son.
Yeah.
So during this time, Cece is becoming very, very peculiar about her image. She doesn't eat for days after the death of her youngest daughter, Sophie. She checked her weight constantly, and she would also develop these fasting cures where she wouldn't eat for days. She practiced tight lacing at the time, which is when you tighten your corset so much that in photos, if you look up photos, the torso literally goes into a curve where it's perhaps no larger than an orange and a half. It's so bad, and it physically, later she would physically ditch tight lacing as a method, but it was as a way to make her feel confident about her shape.
This is sounding like, never mind, me in 2020.
Sounding like me in 2020. Sounding like all of us during the pandemic. Sounds like a little bit like Princess Diana.
Yeah.
And she was disgusted by common food, so she mainly drank this combination of half raw beef steaks squeezed into a thin soup, or milk and egg yolks. Kind of disgusting. But in 1862, she, of course, dropped the practice of tight lacing, but she was terrified of becoming overweight. She met Queen Victoria one time, and she said she was terrified because she thought that Queen Victoria was so overweight that she was, she never met her really again because she was horrified.
Wasn't Queen Victoria not even that, overweight?
She was just, shorter. So that comes with its own things with the body. And she developed actually these really rigorous exercise habits. She installed a gymnasium in her salon in the Hofburg, which I've seen is actually very, daunting almost. And she would, she had balance beams and mats, yoga mats and things, and she would practice each morning at Bad Ischl. She had these gigantic mirrors so that she could correct her every movement and position. She took up fencing, she rode every day for hours, and she would go for huge long hikes and walks, which unfortunately for her ladies-in-waitings also had to attend as well.
That's crazy.
And in the last years,
poor guys.
It would be in any weather. If it was hailing and, her ladies-in-waitings were physically getting bruises because of the hailstorm, she would still go.
That's wild.
What a queen,
Get
though.
me my raincoat. Let's go.
That's sad.
And in the last years of her life, Elizabeth became even more restless, and she would weigh herself up to 3 times a day. She regularly took steam baths to prevent weight gain.
Does that work?
I'm not sure.
I mean, it would make you sweat out like water.
Yeah, so I'm guessing she would probably wear at least something, and it would cause her to sweat profusely.
But through that, you only lose a couple pounds.
And her lowest point would be when she only weighed 97 pounds, which for an adult woman, I'm not going to assume, but it was very.
For an adult woman, her
memoirs of the time report that she was she wasted away to close emaciation, which is where you can see literally the bones.
Oh my god.
And everything. You can see the heart beating. Almost.
No, you couldn't.
You can see the
so
not
sad.
the heart physically,
but the movement.
The movement, and the skin is so pale that you can see the blood it's so bad. And later these are factors of stress and anxiety, and later something that Princess Diana would have unfortunately dealt with. And the same thing was with her beauty. So this is a portrait of her with her hair. She grew out her hair. Franz Joseph would later have a portrait of this in his study so he could look at Sisi every time.
No.
And it's still there today.
No, this is breaking my heart right now.
And throughout the 19th century, Sisi was known as the most beautiful woman ever. She just like Princess Diana.
Yeah.
But she was obsessed with her beauty. She had a hairdresser. This is gonna be a funny name, but it's a German name. Her hairdresser was named Pfifferling. And she was a stage hairdresser for the theater. And she was responsible for all of Sisi's ornate hairstyles. One very popular one is the one that I actually have on my phone wallpaper.
Okay, cute.
With the diamonds. A lot of people say, is that Christine Daae from Phantom of the Opera? And I'm like,
I love Phantom of the Opera.
It's from the movie. They took inspiration, but it's not Christine Daae. And so...
Love Phantom of the Opera.
Her hairdresser was forbidden to wear rings and was required to wear white gloves, and it would take hours of hairdressing.
Why couldn't she wear rings to prevent pulling out the hair?
I'm guessing it would be, unfortunately, causing. Okay,
Continue.
so
sorry.
No, you're all good. So Sisi's hairstylist could not wear rings; she had to wear gloves. I don't know why rings, but she did have to wear white gloves, and hairdressing took hours. So when her hair was washed with a combination of eggs and cognac, which I don't know how effectful that was, but ladies, prom is coming up, and if you want hair like Sisi, you should try that too, because
eggs and cognac.
I've heard eggs in your hair is good.
It is very good, and it apparently worked wonders on her hair.
Yeah.
So, ladies,
I might try.
men, gentlemen,
everybody,
let's do this. Let's normalize this trend. And the strangest thing was that her hairstylist, after her son's death, was asked to pluck the gray hairs and show it to Sisi for inspection. Don't know why. Sisi was scared of getting old too, as we all are.
Terrified.
And her night and bedtime rituals were just as demanding. Sisi would sleep without a pillow on a metal bedstand, and this was believed to be better for her posture. And she would have a facial mask. Some trends we see today with the facial mask. And she often slept with her clothes soaked in cider vinegar to preserve her slim waist, which I don't know why. Maybe some of the oils or something would prevent something.
Note to self, maybe we should try that out.
And she even had this specially imported water from the spa town, which was known to be very, good, so she used that to bathe in. And this was to also preserve her skin tone. She took a cold shower every morning and an olive oil bath in the evening. So now we get to the final points of her life, and you gasp because not a whole lot of people know this. People would think that she would probably fade into obscurity in Corfu or away from Vienna and eventually die in peace. Right. But in 1898, despite warnings of possible assassination attempts, 60-year-old Sisi travels incognito to Geneva.
She didn't care.
She stays at the Hôtel Beau Rivage, which is later reveals that she is a guest staying there. So they do her dirty, and they're like, guys, guess who's staying here?
That's crazy.
And so she has to deal with that. It's not so incognito anymore. And during her travels, Sisi and her lady-in-waiting, the Countess Stara, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, was supposed to travel to Montreux. We do have the last remaining photograph of Sisi, so this is Sisi over here.
That's so eerie.
But this was taken a week before the actual trip because, of course, photographs take time. So this is sort of like a Princess Diana last picture. So this is the last picture of her before her death. That this is what people would come to see as the sort of anxious, failing empress. And in all honesty, she would probably die early because of all the things that she was doing to her body. It would have probably gone worse.
She looks skinny.
You know,
was that insulting?
No. She worked for it, and the results paid off.
See, I'm just she looks skinny. Great job, girl. You
great
worked.
job to her. And so she was promenading along one of the central lakes in Geneva. She was on her way to Montreux, and there was an Italian anarchist, Luigi Lucchini, who figured out that Sisi was actually staying there. He was originally there for the Duc d'Orléans, who was a prominent nobleman in France during this time. And the Duc d'Orléans was supposed to be assassinated, but he was not there. Sisi was. So he was like, okay, well, she's here, so why not? And she, at 2:10 p.m., she was, well, not at 2:10 p.m., but a little bit before then, she was stabbed. Luigi pretended to stumble, and in fact, he stabbed her with a sharp sort of blade. And she died at 2:10 p.m.
Yeah, no body fat protector.
Well, you know, some things. And she had been the Empress of Austria for 44 years. Franz Joseph was devastated.
Oh, no.
The body was later carried back to Vienna via funeral train, and on the inscription, her coffin read, Elizabeth, Empress of Austria. The Hungarians were outraged. They were like, this is our queen. Like, we loved her. We don't love you or whatever the other people are.
Right.
We loved her. So later, Queen of Hungary was hastily added, and the entire empire was in deep mourning. Her funeral procession, which you can see right here, featured 82 sovereigns and high-ranking nobles on the 17th of September. She was actually assassinated, I think, either on the 9th, 10th, or the 11th of September, 1898. And the last thing I would like to share with you guys is an article written by this is an original article written by the New York Times in 1898 on September 11th. And the title reads, for those of you who are perhaps eager, Empress of Austria slain, stabbed on a Geneva quay by an Italian anarchist. So that is the story of Sisi. A lot of people, and again, I would like to reiterate that a lot of people don't know about her. We really don't, and especially American students. If you ask the population of Leesville who knows her, I'm the only one.
Yeah, literally. I've never heard of her before this.
There is a big fan base of her in Europe, especially as she becomes more popular. She is, becoming a trend again. And I encourage people to really look at these women in history who did not have the best of lives, but, Sisi still managed to politically tie in Hungary into the Austrian Empire. So she still did a lot of things.
Right.
She's a tragic hero like Princess Diana and like Marie Antoinette, but her story is still very important and very significant, and I hope that going into the future, people are enticed to read about her. I know, like, with this generation, we're more interested in what Taylor Swift's new album is rather than a dead queen or dead empress. But, there are a lot of things that I think are parallels between modern day figures and Empress Sisi, and we need to, look at that. And 15 years later, Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, and
so
World War I starts with Austria-Hungary.
Oh my god!
So
wait, that's the same Ferdinand?
No. That would be the son. No. Either, I think, nephew.
Oh, okay.
Franz Joseph, I believe.
I thought it was the same
Can
son.
we talk about how it was published on September 11th?
September 11th.
Crazy day.
So, crazy day, guys, later
also,
on.
I thought of this right after. Do y'all know Anne Boleyn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do y'all know the story about how Anne Boleyn's sister was supposed to marry
That's what I was thinking of.
That's what I was thinking of this whole time.
I was like, there's a story like this that's similar, and I could not think of it.
In history, there's so many women who were supposed to marry into royal families. Like, we have to admit that Marie Antoinette was never supposed to be Queen of France. Oh my God, sorry. Mary, Queen of Scots, she was supposed to become the Queen
of England,
of France, before even becoming the Queen of England. And so many women in this time period and even before were supposed to, marry into other houses, and it's crazy. It's also crazy about the parallels, how, 15 years later it would be Franz Ferdinand to be assassinated, but Franz Joseph, he's not a descendant of Marie Antoinette because there's no true descendants, but this Habsburg Empire is so connected, and it would fall in 1916.
It's so crazy to think about, like, because everything is so connected. Like, what would happen if Helene, like, married him instead, or like the little things that, like, would have changed. Like,
Sissy would have been happy.
Very, like, butterfly effect stuff.
Sissy could have married Karl Ludwig, and she probably would have had a happier life, to be honest. It was not her marriage; it was the institution.
Right.
And meanwhile, here at home, we were fighting over racism. So that's what was happening meanwhile.
Yeah.
And this was still later on in her life would be happening during Reconstruction and America's Gilded Age. So we're much more like about America's Gilded Age, because that was when, we have Rockefeller and Vanderbilt.
I hated that unit in A-Push.
Cece never went to America because she
Why would she? She'd be like, they're fighting over silly little things right now. Well, not silly little things, but, silly that the Confederates.
Right. Yeah. And later, Maximilian, who we talked about, who would later become Emperor of Mexico, plot twist, Mexico was an empire, and it was a monarchy. That's how you can still see palaces there today. There was a revolution, I believe somewhere around the name of Cortez. I do not know.
Yes.
He led the main anti-monarchist revolution. Maximilian was executed. Maximilian was executed by firing squad. And his wife would travel back to Austria, and she would unfortunately be driven into insanity, and she would So yeah.
You want to know one more thing that angers me about Anne Boleyn? She was executed because it was a rumor that she had incest with her brother. Even though everyone that married back then had incest with their brother.
Right. And
wasn't it more cousin-y?
No, it was brother. It was her brother.
Actually.
I know, but like, wasn't the incest in general more like cousins? The incest in general
was more cousins, because this stemmed from the fact that the Holy Roman Empire around the medieval ages, late Renaissance, wanted to preserve the Christianity, because this was a time where Protestantism was very irrelevant. So it was not only that because of the blue-bloodedness, and by this point, they still didn't know about the irreversible effects. In the 19th century, there would be a guy who would come along and he would say, "You guys are terrible human beings."
Right.
And they would be like, "Oh." So that's actually how with Franz Ferdinand, he married a, Czech aristocrat instead of, his cousin. And from there, they branch out. Even the modern Habsburgs, there are still descendants of the Habsburgs today living.
Because he ate up not marrying his cousin.
They branch out. They marry, certain individuals, things like that. So that's the story of Empress Sisi. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, that was so interesting, Jacob. I don't think you're crazy.
We should learn more about that.
And today is very fitting because April 24th, all those years ago, was the wedding of Sisi and Prince Joseph. Yeah.
What timing?
God, I didn't know it was the 24th. I'm feeling so left behind right now.
She left Munich on April 20th, but
married on the 24th.
April 24th.
Yeah.
1854.
Happy weddings.
Happy wedding ceremonies.
How many years ago was that? A bunch.
A bunch.
A lot.
A lot.
A lot. Well, thanks for coming, Jacob.
Thanks for sending your great guest. Everyone loves you.
Yes.
I don't know if the school year is almost up, so I don't know if I'll be back for another episode. If I am,
we can.
Thank you.
We'll get you in.
Yeah,
we'll get you in.
It was a pleasure being on this podcast. It's
oh my God! Wait, we only have 3 weeks left.
Right. So it's been a pleasure being able to dive into the other side of history with you guys, and
Do we want to do an episode next week?
Yeah.
It's like basically a 3-day week because of senior skip day. I'm not skipping.
Oh, I am.
Okay,
we'll talk later.
Okay, I am.
Anyways, thanks for listening, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Guys.